And good day and good night and good morning as we continue with part 2 of tonight's adventure. Again, reading from More Adventures in Eternity around 2006, that was published. And this is indicative of being able to split up into several parts and do simultaneous explorations. But you'll notice that I had to have a little ritual to do it. And as opposed to the spontaneity that we seem to be exploring now. Wednesday, July 21st, 8:30 p.m. While attempting a daytime hemisync assisted contact with the English direct voice medium Leslie Flint, after listening to one of his taped sessions, of which there are many, at Toronto Reference Library, as I read a 1981 letter from the researcher Jim Ellis to a potential Canadian purchaser, and succeeding, I had the hunch that it was basically a replay from the night before, and decided to investigate at my earliest opportunity what else transpired that night. Tonight, Wednesday, is my first chance. I had a lot of senses in those days that when I made a contact, I was replaying something that happened either a few hours before or the entire day before. Usual methodology and tape. Approach cottage, that's my cottage in Focus 27 that we touched on earlier. My cottage, Gordon's cottage. Put together long before Gordon's incarnation, although when it was suggested to me in Bruce Moen's work that I should discover this, it was intimated that that would be something that you had created with your current life efforts. But it seemed to me like I had someone had done it before, and somebody that used to be me, or that I was the newest version of, or whatever. Usual methodology and tape. Approach cottage, enter room and touch screen with intent to recover events of Saturday night, July 17, 18. And that was a methodology. I'd go into a room in the cottage and there'd be a touch screen there, and I'd touch it and the events would replay. So a little sort of psychic crutch there, Easy OBE and giddy with anticipation, split into 3 Gordons. Number 1, which gazes lovingly and pityingly at sleeping body, and then moves up above building, there to project the light of love and understanding at building and inhabitants. A sudden, unplanned expression of blessing for my neighbours. That's the apartment building I used to live in. Inspired, that eye begins to move through town, thus blessing every dwelling in turn. Though seemingly boring in retrospect, this divine exercise seems to electrify me, quote-unquote me, more and more as I continue, culminating in a sort of uncontrollable giddiness. The more you give, the more you get, of course. Number 2, Gordon number 2, which moves up through the levels to embrace the higher self-consciousness, much as on other occasions, recognizing and perhaps saluting the energetic entrapments of all the purgatories, paradises, and heavens along the way. They are all, ultimately, merely places to be, fascinating rest stops on the incarnational cycle. As is the monadic, I suppose. Once there, I enter and embrace, seemingly in turn, various completed personalities, quote-unquote completed personalities, filling out our similarities of character and motivation in differing historical circumstances. Here are the philosophers, the courtesan, the king, the peasant, the trader, the innocent child, the deserted wife, the priests, the shamans, the devout pilgrim, the Atlantean magician. How they all give of their essence when I ask. How complete their commitment to the overall education of the monad. All preparatory work, I imagine, for the later and much more detailed encounters in Volume 3. Volume 3 turned out to be You Are History. But at the time it was just something of imagination on my part. Part of me, of course, is impatient and wants that immersion now, but I recognise that insufficient preparation could be, if not disastrous, then at least something of a wasted effort. Number 3, asks for guidance to the astral residence of Leslie Flint, and soon finds himself mysteriously guided to a lovely home in what appears to be a village in the astral version of the Cotswolds in southwest England. I am outside a door knocking. Then I am greeted quite cordially as I am expected, very much in the Mr. Finn style. Seated in front room with Mr. and Mrs., I am offered tea, very congenial, an impression of a quiet but happily fulfilled life, perhaps a welcome rest after a much too busy earth life. A couple enjoying each other's company, house, garden, and local community. I mentioned the recent arrival of the huge Jim Ellis audio tape collection at the University of Manitoba, and how pleased I and others are that it landed up in Canada. Leslie seems interested, but not overly so. Says I should really be speaking with Jim Ellis, as that was his pet project. The audio tapes represent the work of many mediums, not just him. Of course, I know this is true, having examined the detailed contents of the archive included in the 1981 missive stored at the Toronto Reference Library. I congratulate Leslie on the marvellous accuracy in his rendering of Winston Churchill, a tape section of which I listened to just that day. He rather poo-poos my praise, interesting that all he ever really had to do was vacate the premises, while guides organised the ectoplasm and the spirits used the newly constructed voice box. It worked so well because he didn't interfere, essentially. Again, I sense that the Flints feel they've quote-unquote served their time in the spiritualist cause and are happy to let others fill the front lines. An almost textbook example of the astral vacation mode. Yes, they love their life here and take advantage of all the cultural opportunities of the astral, especially film and theatre. There are media outlets which monitor and report on Earth plane news, and they still take an interest that way. I get the impression of both newspaper and television type service. The afterlife is as lovely as they thought it would be, and much more. You can't put into words how lovely it is. I agree, knowing well the verbal hurdles he means. I ask if they're aware of the project known as the Skoll experiment. That was published some years ago. Evidential spiritualism and manifesting of apports and objects, They are indeed know some of those involved, but do not participate. Thursday, July the 23rd, 4 p.m. Usual methodology in hemisync tape. Upon exiting the body, a sense of zany comedy erupts. Astral Gordon seems to think, gee, what'll I do tonight? I don't know. Well, what do you? Then a replica Gordon appears from number 1, standing next to him. He shrugs his shoulders in the classic search me pose, and then he says, why don't you ask him? Maybe he knows. Number 3 then pops out from number 2, but he acts just as clueless as the first two. Sound like the Marx Brothers, don't they? They stare at each other in a parody of idiocy. Then they fly out the window onto a branch of a tree outside. My old friend Walter, I used to call that tree, it was right outside my balcony, Walter. There they dangle their legs like happy boys skipping school. Number 1 says, I think maybe I'll visit my dear dead mother. The other two nod wide-eyed. Number 2 says, maybe I'll go to Sudan and see for myself just how vicious that civil war really is. Number 3, suddenly inspired, says, maybe I'll go to England and cavort with Davis and crop circles. Then they all fly off in 3 directions as if challenging the observing me to try and follow. Number 1 does indeed visit with his dear dead mother, who of course is also my dear dead mother. I find them seated on a lawn somewhere, probably the nursing home grounds. My mother hadn't passed over that long, and her death is covered earlier in this book. I find them seated on a lawn somewhere, probably the nursing home grounds. She is with her long passed over sister, someone who is very dear to her heart, and with whom I am sure she is thrilled to be reunited. They have obviously had plenty of time to get acquainted, as they seem quite comfortable together. Nellie and I exchange cautious greetings. I was about 4 years old when she passed. There is a formality to our interaction I find quite amusing, the result, I suspect, of an energy blockage caused by her not having had a child while on Earth. Although why that should be operative after 50-odd Earth years, I cannot say. As sisters, they were bonded deeply during World War II, when both their husbands were abroad for years, and their daily lives intertwined to make them and their 4 girls almost one family. I did not come along until several years after that, and was perhaps seen as a bit of an interloper or cause for jealousy. Number 2 flies over towards Africa, but takes a small detour to the Middle East first, becoming one of the endlessly rotating crew of discarnates who beam light into the roiling mass of dark cloud-like energies covering Israel-Palestine. He doesn't so much originate the beam, but merges and magnifies what is already there. After some of that no-time, he moves on to the Sudan, expecting the worst. The observing eye resists following, reluctant to observe the cutthroat raids, destroyed villages, starving children, and mass rapes which are likely to emerge. Rather, like flipping through the entertainment section of the newspaper and knowing exactly which movies you'd rather not see. Looking back at it later, when the observing me, that was when we used to go see movies, remember that? Looking back at it later, when the observing me had come to terms with his disgust by allowing the heavy vibrations of vengeance and bestiality to pass through unhindered, instead of being hindered by pride and ethics, I could see this Gordon attempting to apply energetic zaps of mercy and compassion at those who were either preparing or conducting a program of rape and pillage. Mostly it was ineffective, as the rage and bloodlust which propelled the attackers had a determined steely edge which could not be significantly softened. I fretted about free will and chain of karma issues as I watched the grim tales unfold. A number of other angels and helpers surveyed the scene with attitudes saddened by the inevitability. And, of course, ethnically appropriate guides assisted the dead to remove themselves from the scene. Number 3 shifts quickly to England and meets up with a deva intimately connected with the crafting of crop formations. A merging of beings, which could be considered a discussion of sorts, leads to a suggestion that I should perhaps re-experience the druid character who was in on the plan to begin with. I've sensed this character several times before and made certain efforts to, as we say these days, understand where he was coming from. I see now that he is but one of several druid types who incarnated as my monad's contribution to the culture. In an earlier meditative connection completed while sitting inside a formation on a very hot day in the summer of 2001, I had gotten the distinct impression, that the whole crop circle phenomenon of modern times was planned out by a gathering of humans and devas who knew, even then, of the energy vibrational shift slated for the planet, and together prepared the energetic templates for the elaborate designs now emerging in the fields. The news had not surprised me, but like any of a dozen other issues brought up by my exploration, I had not gotten around to exploring it farther. Perhaps now was the time. Of course, now is always the time, but the scheduling nature of physical plane life tends to put agendas into lists of things to do, and some of those things seem to take forever to get to. There are just so many fascinating avenues of exploration, and each of them leads to at least 4 others. Too true. All cultures worthy of the appellation have their share of ancient wisdom, for no matter how maligned or represented by the power-hungry elites and the armies of the ignorant, fonts of ancient light have and always will poke their heads through the cracks in the concrete. And though the counsel of the wise will more often be mocked than moved on, it is always there for the truly curious. The Druids, at least those who lived in ancient Britain, were a priestly, scholarly elite of a distinctly Celtic hue, whose profoundly oral culture leaves plenty of room for romanticizing and guesswork. I do not propose that my incarnational access is any more accurate or verifiable than any other source. I offer it humbly without any hint or assistance of doctrinal authenticity. After the disappointments of Akhenaten's Egypt, a number of us were seeking a non-hierarchical society where the path of honourable action, coupled with the selfless pursuit of wisdom, could be attempted with a minimum of power-base interference. The effort at earthly Eden, which we joined, was perhaps as successful as any essayed on this planet. Scattered tribal groupings pursued their hunting, agriculture, arts, and sciences with a joyful diligence, born to those who root themselves in nature. Pagans, to be sure. Cooperation with the nature spirits was a daily fact of life. Trees and rivers were our ancient companions, prayed to, played with, and endlessly consulted. When I feel out those past selves, I sense a profound commitment to a type of meditative shamanism, almost certainly aided by the psychoactive plants gifted to those holy isles. In meditation and or out-of-body experience, the illusion of time was easily transcended. Many of our caste traversed the timelines like tourists. Both the roots of Hinduism and the psychic scars of Atlantis were available to our scrying. We understood the powers of light and darkness and harmonized ourselves to their tides. We knew the arrival of the Romans and the Christians was written in the winds, and we awaited their incursions, secure in our assumptions. We retreated bruised from the first and were ever so gradually absorbed by the second. The last Druid incarnation of which Gordon's soul energy was a part of can be witnessed to this day, at least by me standing proudly in the forest of which he was a living, breathing component, viewing the imminent arrival of the disciples from the Mediterranean on the southern shores of mythical Albion, through which we now think of as the Third Eye, and basically bidding them adieu before they set foot on the land he thought of as holy. We do not need your prophet and claim of divinity. We have our own perfect place here, breathing with the mountains, the trees, and the rivers, creating and procreating in the bosom of our Mother Nature. We fulfill God's purpose in our being, and we need no further reason. Return to the land of the olive tree. Ha! What an attitude, eh? This soul can also be witnessed, at least by me, being counselled in the afterlife by his guides, counselled to accept the cosmic inevitability of the Christ energy and devote himself to working towards its fulfillment on earth. This leads to at least 3 incarnations carving niches in the long Christian project of pacifying the pagan energy stream, binding it with the fear of damnation and rewarding its docile behavior with the promise of salvation. More attitude. But, as I said, now is always the time. A number of human souls, then appearing as druids, entered into the project with angels and devas to design energetic templates for miracles far into the future, a future when man, in order to conquer the physical with feats of engineering rather than those of the imagination, would have separated himself from the ancient understanding of his place in nature. Seeing himself as the only sentient intelligence alone in the universe with his pride and prerogative, a defiant Lucifer. Those miracles are the crop formations, now manifesting worldwide to much discussion, debate, and amazement. The energies they embody are for the earth and us to regenerate and inspire. You can enter these sentient temples at will, no matter where you live. Move to their sites with passion and imagination, physically if you can, but OBE if you must. The energies are gifts for the unveiling of your light body. Open yourself to them and feel the expansion, which you can interpret according to your mental inclinations. Geometry, architecture, healing, music, and extraterrestrial anthropology are among the disciplines illuminated. Whatever your intellectual or physiological predisposition, if you surrender your separated ego to the cosmic presences, you will, like some helium balloon, begin to float away from the anchors of your self-limitations. And surely that is what you ultimately desire. Understand that so-called miracles can be planned and executed from anywhere in the space-time continuum, as well as inspiring both those who choose to believe and those who choose to doubt. They can and do act as a counterbalance to those dark feats of mind control exercised by the powers of greed and voracious consumption at the helm of the capitalist enterprise. Those feats which encourage fear and the desire for protection. Understand that both will continue and that their audiences will always have a choice. understand that it has never been any different, and above all, that the graduation is inevitable. The graduation is inevitable. Keep that in mind. What shall we do now? We shall do as we wish, as we please, almost on a whim. But as we've said in discussions about ideas and where do they come from, where do whims come from? The whimsical house? Yes, perhaps. I'm being given the whimsical idea that I can speak with the soul energy of RFK Jr., who has entered the presidential race and filled with the idealism of changing things for the better and ridding the, or shall we say, the upper levels of American society of corruption and profiteering and lying. At this point, I've seen several interviews, and I'm impressed with his determination, despite a almost crippling condition with his voice, which makes speaking quite difficult. And he's the last one to be a smooth-voiced politician, that is for sure. And of course, he's inspired by the examples of his father and his uncle. And I'm pretty sure they're, if not feeding him ideas, they're certainly feeding him energy. You know, go for it. You know, they're fully into what the. Why am I getting ideas, or am I connected to them? As you know, I have channeled JFK before, not recently, but a number of times. And he seemed to be very distanced from the chaos of our world, and felt he had played his part and was very calm and thinking things over, not feeling vengeance or resentment. He seemed to have accepted all that had happened. And he talked about, he mentioned talking to Khrushchev. He didn't mention talking to any of the dead guys that helped engineer his downfall. But I got the feeling he didn't feel it was worth feeling angry and vengeful about. But I do get the feeling right now that he feels it's important to encourage RFK Jr. in his quest for making a better world, as JFK did try to do. Anyway, I don't want to get too political here, but RFK I did not channel significantly, although there was a group meeting of the Kennedys, the clan, with Marilyn Monroe and Mary Jo Kopechne in the group, amongst others. And it was done at the time of the release of the movie Chappaquiddick, which I saw and was impressed by. And you can check that out in one of my earlier videos. But RFK, can I talk to his soul? I'm being told that I can. I'm being told by my guide, somebody's guide, that RFK although a very politicized social activist, and we know he's totally into environmental causes, cleaning up rivers and all that sort of thing, not to mention the dangers of vaccines. I've been following that for a long time, having worked with autistic children in my job some years ago. I can tell you, there is no experience more persuasive than having the mother of an autistic child describe in detail how they started to go backwards in intelligence and in consciousness, mere days, if not weeks, after that 2-year-old vaccine. Anyway, that's a whole other kettle of fish, but it was a very persuasive experience. And as far as I'm concerned, it cannot be denied. But there are many who would like to deny it. So let us not get stuck there. The point is made, and obviously Mr. Kennedy is much moved by the sufferings of others. And in a genuine fashion. He seems so genuine, it's like, how could he be a politician? But the conversation I'm hoping to have with his soul energy is right here, right now. Well, RFK, it's a pleasure to spend some time with you, and I thank you for making that effort. And he says, well, I'm not only am I giving myself almost endlessly to the world of the internet through independent media organizations who are willing to talk to me, and mainstream who are finally taking me seriously, that the poll numbers are poking them in the ribs, as it were. And I've also been advised that talking to people like yourself is not without value, that you have influence, and I go, yeah, I got some influence, but I'm not on the Joe Rogan level, that is for sure. But yes, it's important to communicate on a psychic level as well as a mental level. And please continue. I don't wish to interrupt. So yes, it's important for me to give my message out on this level as well as the podcast level, because I've been told I can touch the psyches and the hearts of others as well as the brains, the dissenting brain, the independent brain, the brain that wants to think for itself rather than be persuaded by the fraudulent gifts of others. I want to represent that independent spirit in North American humanity. I want to be a voice for the unheard. I want to be a rallying point for those who are endlessly dissatisfied with the raw deal that they're being given on a daily basis. I want to open up the secret world of lies and disinformation and obscene profit-making that deprives the majority of Americans from a fair deal, from a level playing field, from a chance to actualize themselves fully. it's that sense of the game being all sewn up and the outcome inevitable, and the conviction that a whole class of citizens cannot get to the table and have their fair share of the pie. The sense that they are to stand under the table and catch the crumbs as they fall off the plates of the elite. Is that enough? Do I need to say more? Do I need to go into detail? And I'm saying, well, I get your point. I get all your points, and I get the motivation behind your points. Your motivation to me, sir, is so pure as to be almost unbelievable. We've seen it in others who turned out to be, not quite what was on offer. Those who would promise the earth and not give it, and leave their electorate, their followers, with a deep sense of disappointment. So if you wish to go into slightly more detail, please, take a few moments and do so. I'm not here to push support for your campaign, because I'm a Canadian, I'm not an American. I have no right to do that. I'm not an interested party, although obviously American policy does affect Canada. Most recently, Mr. Kennedy, on the states, the Supreme Court decision banning abortion, and then many states, agreeing with that and putting it into force, where Canada, through our Prime Minister, Mr. Trudeau, almost immediately said in public, on the media, that anyone that wanted to come to Canada for an abortion was more than welcome to do so. So you see, we have, we have reactions and repercussions here. So Mr. Kennedy is saying to me, what other issues are you interested in, sir? And my immediate reaction is, the passing of our right to die legislation, which is a few years old now and kind of inspired by, Oregon, Washington State, Switzerland. And it's a great step forward for individual choice and the sovereignty of the individual. I'm very pleased to see it happening, and it is being taken advantage of by many, many Canadians who fit the category. You're going to die, it's going to be horrible, and you have a right to end your life medically with the total assistance of the medical system. And one can only hope that it spreads. That's something I have a strong interest in. And it seems to be moving along just fine. We're dealing with some of the details and difficulties, and it's not always smooth sailing, but it's been pretty good so far. And I understand in the American states where it is legal, it is proceeding along apace. I'm wondering, sir, if you do get to a position of power, how you might deal with those states around the world that are under the firm grip of authoritarianism, and where people are definitely not free. And even though you would sense that the freedom of North Americans has been curtailed by economic disparity, what about these states where it's much, much worse? And he's saying, well, you can only do what you can do. You can't change the world. You can, what's he saying? You can fix up your neighborhood, but you can't fix up the planet. That's up for the other neighborhoods. Now, we can do sanctions like we're doing. The question is, how effective are sanctions? Partially, I think, but with the levels of corruption around the world, including America, sanctions can only go so far because some of these organizations and states have pots of money, pots of money, and they feel that they can throw it away. The pharmaceutical companies being one center of immense wealth. So that's how I would react to that. I would do what I could, but I would recognize the limitations of my desire to change things for the better. If I can change things for the better in America, even slightly, I will be a very gratified individual. I will have filled one more aspect of my life's purpose. I will have continued on the great work of my family, my uncle, my father. And for me, there is no greater glory. Although I think my wife might disagree, but that's the world we live in. Women get to disagree and don't get to be punished for disagreeing. And I certainly hold to that truth, hold to that value. Well, again, thank you, sir. It's very kind of you, given your complete commitment to your career path, to spend a few moments, even on a soul level, which I know is not really limited. And as I'm sure you're finding out yourself, are you discovering the levels of soul that you have? Yes, I am. That part of my being is being expanded, mainly by spirit guides, or people that I am told are spirit guides. I was awakened. They used the idealism of my political and social self to awaken the, how shall we say, the idealism of the soul. And when I look at it now, a very clever move. And so I'm saying, yes, spirit guides are good at that sort of thing. They're very, they're devious in a very honest way, as paradoxical as that may sound. They can get you going. They know the buttons to push. That's if you've got any buttons visible. Some people don't have any buttons visible. They're all closed up. But if you've got a functioning heart chakra and a conscience, buttons will be there. And you certainly do have that. And I wish you well in all your endeavors, sir. Thank you, RFK Jr. On the soul level, I'm not sure his ego level will be aware of this. He might have a dream about it. He might have an intuition. And of course, he's so busy, I wonder if he's got time for intuitions and dreams. But we'll see. And with that, friends, I look forward to tomorrow when we will do more projecting. And I hope you feel inspired to do a little sitting in the armchair and projecting yourself. Anytime you've got 15 minutes, give it a go. Bye-bye.